very easy to say never pay from a distance, but when your systems are down and backups are gone and millions are bleeding out of the business daily, it's survival. No one wants to fund crime, but sometimes you're buying your time to live, and your business has to do it if it wants to survive. It's not about your reputation anymore. It's not about your clients even anymore. It's about survival.
Welcome to the CISO Signal, the true cybercrime podcast. I'm Jeremy Ladner. On this episode, the company that insures risk became the risk. In March 2021, CNA Insurance, one of the largest commercial insurers in the U.S., fell victim to a ransomware attack that encrypted 15,000 devices and compromised customer data, forcing the shutdown of its systems for weeks. The breach didn't just steal data, it stripped away the illusion of preparedness for an organization built to model probability, quantify exposure, and price protection. It was the ultimate irony. They didn't underwrite the threat, they underestimated it. Joining us is our CISO co-host, Matan Eli Matalon, an incident response leader and security strategist with experience across the startup world, military intelligence, and enterprise defense. Matan, welcome to the show. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Awesome. So my name is Matan. I am CISO for OP Innovate. OP Innovate, we're basically a cybersecurity company that focuses on both preventing attacks and helping organizations respond when things go wrong, Proactive side, we do a lot of deep dive penetration testing to help companies find and fix weaknesses before attackers do. But we're also the team that gets called up when fires already started, handling incident response, forensics, helping companies get back on their feet.
Thank you, Matan. Now, let's get started with the investigation. We are in the midst of a ceaseless war, not of bombs or bullets, but of breaches, firewalls, and silent incursions. The targets, our borders, our banks, our commerce, and the critical infrastructure that underpins a free civilization. The enemy is cloaked in code, fueled by greed, glory, and a desire for chaos. This is the story of the unseen protectors, the nameless generals, the CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers. They are the guardians at the gate, the watchers on the wall, ever vigilant and always listening for the CISO signal. There's a kind of silence no company trains for. Not the silence of idle inboxes or frozen dashboards, but the deep, airless quiet that follows total digital collapse. In March 2021, CNA Financial, one of the largest insurance carriers in the United States, fell dark. Not a power outage, a ransomware attack. 15,000 machines were encrypted, phones offline, email gone. An entire enterprise unplugged from itself. The attackers didn't boast, they didn't break things for fun. They came with a purpose and a number: $40 million. At the time, it was the largest known ransom demand in history by multiples. But this wasn't just any company. CNA didn't just insure factories and fleets. They insured cyber risk. They held the names of businesses already worried about breaches, organizations that paid for protection. To the right adversary, that's not just a customer database. It's a blueprint for who will pay next, a list of future victims. And if that list got out, it wasn't just CNA's systems at risk, it was everyone they'd sworn to protect. This is the story of CNA Financial, a 100-year-old giant brought to its knees by a breach no one saw coming. And this is the CISO signal. So let's talk about CNA in general at first, and then we'll kind of dive into some details. But because you are this CISO for hire or outsourced CISO, you're often called in when something's already gone wrong. I think you mentioned that as well in your introduction. What does that moment feel like when you get that call, that emergency panicked call, whether it's a late night, maybe it's on the weekend? What's that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, it happens way more times than I can count. A CISO, especially a CISO as a service and then incident response, manager is not only a technical role, but it's also like a psychological one. It's an emotional one. You're like their shrink. It's not only to come and solve the problem, but it's also to make sure they are relaxed enough and confident enough and trusting you into managing this. So it's about coming in and build that initial trust between the parties, making sure they understand where you're coming from, what you're trying to achieve, that you are here for them, not for me, not for anyone else, for the business. This is your main goal. And when you set that initial trust, it's easier to come in and start working and get to the bottom of the incident.
Do you remember a moment that really shook you, where the weight of the responsibility of being this guardian at the gate, protector, watcher on the wall, landed with you and you realized the responsibility and the magnitude of the responsibility in protecting these organizations and these companies?
Yeah, not too long ago, I'd say like 2 months ago, we had a very big incident response at a major organization in the US where we got approached. They saw malicious activity in one of their development environments, and they didn't really know what was going on. And what made me feel really, really surreal is that the fact that security posture was good. The security posture was really good. It's one that you expect to see at a client. You want to see at a client. They got every single tool in the book. They got their network segmented. They got the right VPN identity. They had everything, but they still got hit with something that at the first you didn't know what it was and how they got in. So that feeling is kind of, it paralyzes you a little bit. You don't know where to start, what you want to check first, and this is the moment when you really get tested by your emotions, how you communicate with them, how you communicate with yourself, and what do you do first.
We love making this podcast, and we really hope that shows in the care and quality that we invest in it. And we would really appreciate it if you could take a moment to like and share it with your fellow security professionals, as well as dropping us a comment, letting us know what stories and guests you'd like to have on the podcast in future episodes. Now, back to the story. Act 1. The Risk Experts. CNA Financial didn't build cars, they didn't make software or manufacture microchips. They sold something harder to define and much harder to replace: assurance. Founded in 1897, CNA had spent over a century building trust. Trust that losses could be managed, that disasters could be priced, prepared for, and, if necessary, paid out. They were a backbone institution. They insured skyscrapers and shipping lines. But more recently, they insured cyber. By 2021, CNA had become one of the largest cyber insurance providers in the U.S. Their policies covered ransomware. Their language warned of credential theft, lateral movement, exfiltration. Their job was to anticipate the breach before it happened, to study the attacker's playbook, and write policies that made the unthinkable manageable. But like many large, mature enterprises, CNA carried technical debt behind its sleek branding. Legacy systems, patchwork infrastructure, a hybrid of on-prem servers and cloud migrations still in progress. And somewhere inside that hybrid sprawl, a door had been left open. It wasn't negligence, it was complexity. Years of mergers, years of integrations, systems designed for resilience, but not necessarily for speed or visibility. And so, while CNA managed risk for others, they quietly inherited risk of their own. Internally, security tools hummed in the background: phishing filters, VPNs, endpoint detection. The modern stack checked, maintained, and compliant. But in practice, security wasn't just a product, it was a race. And in March 2021, someone else crossed the finish line first. They weren't a nation state, not a known APT, at least not yet. But what they had was patience and precision. The malware came quietly, not through a wide open door, but through a subtle gap in the frame. And once in, it didn't blink, it didn't pause, it just spread. By the time CNA realized what was happening, it wasn't just about defending their systems, it was about whether they could still defend anyone's.
What do you wish people understood about being a CISO that never shows up in the job description?
You're not only there to solve the technical problems, you're there to solve more complex business, people-related problems. It's not a checklist. It's about trust. You carry that weight of potential failure every day and sometimes even blame. So you need to be a very mentally strong person to handle stress from not only the specific problem side, but also from many parties in that specific business.
Okay, so if you had to name one issue, one concern that keeps you up at night in regards to your ability to provide security and respond to an incident, what would that one issue be?
It's really talked about, but during an incident and big incidents, it's what really keeps me up at night. It's the resources, getting the right resources, because when you have a team of incident responders and analysts, it's all about getting the right people onto the job and managing the time well and the assignments. Because if you don't manage your research bank and the things that you want to achieve in that incident response well, the incident response is not going to go well. So for me, when I manage an incident response, I really get nervous about the resourcing because it's everything in an incident.
When you see an organization like CNA go dark, what would your first step have been if they were your client?
Smart man once told me that when a big incident happens, the first thing you do is you grab a cold glass of water and just breathe. You have to be relaxed. You have to be very focused. And the first thing that you want to do is assess the impact, because that's everything, because that sets your tone and what you're going to do first and next. You have to understand what happened. What is the potential impact to the business is going to be? How much money is this, environment being down going to cost you? How much money does the data being leaked going to cost you? Is it personal information? Is it PII? Is it health information? What is the regulatory impact of this? This whole things of items and answers that you want to get, they set the tone for the entire incident. So before you even do any technical stuff on the client's environment, you have to answer some very core questions.
Act 2. Contact lost. There is a moment just before impact when the world goes quiet. No alarms, no flashing lights, just stillness. And that's how it began at CNA. Not with chaos, but with subtle disconnection. A delay in response, a paused cursor, a call that didn't go through. The systems were still on, but something beneath them wasn't. The malware was already inside, moving, watching, preparing. And then it began to spread. Not wildly, not with noise, but with intent. One endpoint, then another. Desktops across departments locking into silence. Servers blinking off, one by one, like lights going out in a distant city. By the time it was recognized as ransomware, it had already become everything. Phoenix Locker, though the name came later, had claimed more than just devices. It had severed the company's spine, encrypted over 15,000 machines. Not just tools, but lifelines. Email gone, phones dead, the network detached from itself like a body without a nervous system. What remained was analog, footsteps in quiet hallways, flashlights sweeping across darkened desks, whiteboards, handwritten notes, radios if you were lucky. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who understood the stakes. CNA didn't just insure companies against cyber risk, they insured against this. They were supposed to be the ones who understood how to prevent it, contain it, price it. Now they were living it in real time, in silence. And worse, files had been taken. Policyholder data, personal records, risk profiles, names and numbers and blueprints for future attacks. The ransom note came quietly, no theatrics, no countdown, just a demand. $40 million. At the time, the largest known ransom ever paid, and perhaps the most consequential, because CNA didn't just hold sensitive data. They held the identities of other companies already afraid of breaches. To the wrong adversary, that wasn't just a list, it was a target map. Outside the building, the world hadn't noticed yet. The headlines were all still quiet. But inside, CNA faced the most impossible question. What is the cost of silence?
During a major ransomware event like CNA's, what's the right way to handle communication between vendors, insurers, legal, and execs?
One word that I would describe it is orchestration. It's about every single person needs to know their place, and they have their place to say their opinion. But at the end, it's going to be my recommendation of what the next move is, and it's going to be the CEO's final word. So it's all about orchestration, giving the person the place to say their piece, but it has to be in a respected way. It has to be in a well-organized way, and it has to give my way of giving my recommendation. And it's going to be the CEO final word and them accepting it.
Have you run into any situations where you've given advice to the C-suite, to the CEO or someone else, and they said, no, we can't do that because of business situation that we can't share with you, but there are things that are going on, maybe for whatever reason, they just didn't take your advice. Did you ever run into that?
Of course. I mean, a lot of times when we come from the outside, we always don't have the perspective of an employee or a C-level manager in that organization. We don't know every piece of information in that business. So when I come in, I give my unbiased opinion or recommendation. And sometimes, it conflicts with other stuff, which I don't know about when a CEO comes in and tells me, we can't do this, we can do that. Usually I would say, okay, look, you know your business and I'm here to serve your business. And if you think this is wrong for your business, then I'm going with you. But for the record, and I always say for the record, and we always make sure we document those things in a well-designed report, that it was being recommended by us. And the CEO chose not to go with that direction with whatever reason. When you come in as a security person from the outside, you are the expertise on that, and you're entitled to say your opinion and your recommendation, and they are entitled to say no, but it always needs to be on record that you gave that information, because sometimes, rare cases, they're going to try to twist it against you sometimes because they are in a very stressful position, and if things go wrong even after the incident, everyone wants to point a finger.
CNA was somewhat unique in the fact that it's one of the largest insurance companies in the US, and what they insure are other companies against cyber attacks. So if the attacker gets inside, has access to all kinds of data, let's say a list of other companies that are paying for cyber insurance, that's their target list for who they're going to hit up next. Does that change how you would advise them, whether it's pay, don't pay? Is that even something that you would advise on? Or are you just there to basically get their systems back online, retrieve their data, etc.?
It's about crisis management. And first of all, when you reach to a company like CNA, which they sell cyber insurance, it's about reputation. And if you ruin that reputation by getting hit by yourself in such way and getting that ransom ask, then it's a problem. First for your brand, and second for the clients that are paying for you. And like I said before, supply chain attacks are big these days because attackers not only target the end of businesses, they target their suppliers so they can reach more. So that definitely changes the picture in regards to paying a ransom. Generally, my position is usually not to advise if to pay or not to pay, because usually those companies have their own, legal or financial advisors to guide them in that direction. But if they would ask me for my opinion, it all adds up to the impact. What would be the financial and business impact of not paying, of, let's say, the data being actually leaked, of that environments not being restored if you don't have the right backups. If that business and financial impact exceeds that ransom payment, then I would probably suggest them to pay it. Although morally, this is probably wrong, but moral doesn't take you to the bank. And if you're looking at a business and the business goal is to maximize, their financial capabilities, then that probably paying is the right way to go. But again, it varies and it depends on a lot of variables.
Act 3. The cost of control. There are breaches you respond to, and then there are breaches you negotiate with. This was the second kind. The attackers had said little, no manifesto, no countdown, just a lock on the systems and a number, 999 Bitcoin, roughly $55 million at the time, cold, calculated, and delivered in code. But CNA didn't pay, not immediately. They engaged. Negotiators, third-party and unbranded, began the slow, tense ritual of back-channel messages, delayed replies, subtle signals, stalling, probing, testing the adversary's patience. But it didn't work. The demand increased. 1,099 Bitcoin now, nearly $60 million. The price of recovery was going up by the day. For 2 weeks, the back and forth continued, not in war rooms, but in encrypted chats, not with raised voices, but with slow typing ellipses. The attackers weren't amateurs. They didn't posture, they didn't panic. They knew who they had and what CNA stood to lose. Because this wasn't just a company brought to a halt, it was an insurer of cyber risk. It held the names, exposures, and histories of companies who were already worried about ransomware. Policyholders, executives, industries marked vulnerable, and now exposed. If that data was sold, it wouldn't just hurt CNA, it would prime the next victims. A roadmap of the insurable, the pre-qualified, the likely to pay. That was the real leverage. Inside CNA, the debate wasn't philosophical, it was operational. Every hour meant delayed claims, eroding trust, rising reputational cost. Systems remained encrypted. The business was functional, but barely. Publicly, CNA said little. Privately, they ran every scenario. Legal compliance, regulatory exposure. Could they pay? Should they? They consulted the U.S. Department of Treasury, specifically the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC. The attackers were believed to be part of the Phoenix Group, using a ransomware variant linked to Evil Corp. But unlike Evil Corp, Phoenix was not sanctioned. That cleared a legal path, but not a moral one. Still, with the backing of law enforcement, and after vetting the threat actor through multiple channels, CNA authorized the transfer. 1,000 Bitcoin, roughly $40 million. A negotiated reduction, but still one of the largest known ransomware payments in history. The payment was made anonymously, as always. No receipts, no paper trail, just a cold transaction on a blockchain ledger. Value moved. And with it, the promise of a decryption key. The key arrived, files began to unlock, servers blinked back to life, and CNA's systems stirred. But they did not celebrate because the recovery was not instant, and it was not clean. Some files were corrupted, some had been copied, and no one yet knew what had been left behind. The business resumed, but not where it had left off. Something had changed. The breach wasn't just a technical failure, it was a reputational rupture. Word leaked of the payment, reporters circled, forums buzzed. CNA wouldn't confirm the number. They didn't need to, everyone already knew. And in cybersecurity circles, the questions began to echo. Had CNA done the right thing? Or had they set a price for recovery that others would be forced to match? For the attackers, the payout was validation. For the industry, it was a line drawn in dark water. And for CNA, it was the beginning of the next phase. The breach was no longer about what had been lost. It was about what was still out there and who might be coming next.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because you're right. Paying ransom is certainly not the moral thing to do, and it invites more attacks. But at the same time, if you have this corporate responsibility where you, let's say, have 1,000 customers who've paid you for cyber attack insurance, and the attacker is threatening to make that list public so that other attackers start lining up to attack your customers because now they know they're insured and they're more likely to pay up. Even if it hurts you morally to pay up the 40 million in this case, then you do it because in some ways it's the right thing to do because you believe you're protecting your customers.
Yeah, it's not, you have responsibility. You have responsibility not only to yourself, but to other companies as well.
So I know we touched on this briefly, but is there anything you want to add in regards to the concept and wisdom of paying ransom demands like the $40 million that CNA was forced to fork over?
Yeah. So, like I said, it's very easy to say never pay from a distance. But, when your systems are down and backups are gone and millions are bleeding out of the business daily, it's survival, basically. No one wants to fund crime, but sometimes you're buying your time to live, and your business has to do it if it wants to survive. It's not about your reputation anymore. It's not about your clients even anymore. It's about survival. So it varies and depends on a lot of variables, but sometimes you got to do it. You have no choice.
Do you think most of your clients could survive 10 days completely offline like CNA?
That's a very good question because it differs between one client and another. I had an incident a few months back that an attacker leaked a lot of the data out of that organization, and we had to shut down the environment for like 2 days. And after few hours, clients already threatened to leave. And it was not even about the cyber attack anymore. It's about restoring that trust and reputation. On the contrary, I had another incident where the client told me, look, the incident only happened in the development environment, and the attacker seems to not be able to get out of it, and it only contained to this environment. And I don't mind shutting down the dev environment for how long as it needs to find the root cause for this incident, so I can shut it down and it has no business impact on me. So it really varies. But as I saw, and in a lot of businesses, 10 hours could even break them. So 10 days could be very, very crucial.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Different companies are going to react differently. If all your business is online, it's going to make a big difference versus whether you have a website up and a couple things, and it's an inconvenience. Okay, great. So what tools or tactics are underrated in defending against attack like CNA?
Visibility. I think for me, visibility is everything because you cannot protect what you can't see. You cannot respond what you can see. If I can't be able to see and be able to alert on suspicious activity or malicious activity, then I cannot defend against it. And second thing, which I really think is important, is about the segmentation. If you have the right segmentation between environments and and be able to say that your most crown jewels are being protected by that segmentation, that I am well rest assured that if you do get hit in one of your external facing environments, the attacker won't be able to move laterally into those more important production-like environments. So segmentation is very important. But again, cybersecurity is all about defense and layers. You're building those layers to slow down the attackers. There's never that 100% protection. You always try to make it harder for the attacker. So you don't only need that segmentation and visibility. It has to be combined with, that EDR, that identity controls, those DNS layer protection. The basics still win those battles. It's not about the 0 days anymore. They focus usually on those simple weaknesses.
Act 4. Surface tension. The lights came back on slowly, system by system, file by file, and function by function. After weeks of darkness, CNA's infrastructure began to hum again. Work resumed, claims were processed, and phones rang. But something fundamental had shifted. Internally, there was relief. Externally, there were questions. The breach, once invisible to the outside world, was now impossible to ignore. Headlines began to surface, not just about the attack, but about the price. $40 million, 1,000 Bitcoin, paid in full, reported but not confirmed, echoed but not denied. The amount set a new watermark, one that towered above the others. Colonial Pipeline weeks later would pay $4.4 million, JBS Foods $11 million. CNA's payment was several times that, and the target wasn't infrastructure or food, it was trust. The industry took notice, and so did regulators. There were no sanctions violations, CNA had verified that. They worked in tandem with federal law enforcement, followed OFAC guidance, made sure the attackers were not on the Treasury's blacklist. Legally, the path was clear, but ethically, the terrain was unstable. Security professionals debated it openly. Had CNA prevented wider damage or funded a playbook for future attackers? Was this containment or encouragement? Inside the company, CNA began the hard work of rebuilding, not just systems, but credibility. A full forensic investigation was launched, and they confirmed that the attackers had gained access to sensitive personal information. 75,349 individuals were affected, mostly employees, past and present, and their dependents. The company offered credit monitoring, issued notifications, and published statements. But they chose their words carefully. The message was always framed around restoration, control, and compliance, and not fear. What CNA didn't say publicly, couldn't say, was what else might have been taken. The value wasn't in the files themselves, it was in the patterns. Insurers know more than they say about risk, exposure, liability. That's what makes them valuable. And what makes them vulnerable. In the months that followed, CNA initiated sweeping changes: security modernization, cloud migration, new controls, and new vendors. Externally, they began advocating for ransomware awareness, speaking on resilience, positioning themselves as a cautionary tale, but not a cautionary brand. It was a careful return to visibility, controlled, measured, and very corporate. But beneath the surface, other conversations had started. Insurance firms reconsidered their underwriting models, premiums rose, policies narrowed, and some insurers quietly began refusing to cover ransomware payments altogether. The market was changing, and CNA's breach was part of the reason why. Because this wasn't just another attack, it was a glimpse into a high-value, low-resilience target class. The insurers of risk themselves. No one in the industry missed the irony, and no one was ready to say it couldn't happen again, because the truth is CNA did many things right. They followed guidance, they contained the spread, they worked with law enforcement, they communicated with regulators, and they took care of their people. But even doing everything right wasn't enough to stop the breach. or to avoid the payment, or to fully explain what had been lost. Because not all damage is visible, not all compromises leave logs, and not all truths survive press review. CNA returned to business, but the industry had changed around them. More cautious, more expensive, and in some corners, more afraid. The ransomware economy had evolved, and this breach helped prove just how valuable the right kind of victim could be.
When something does blow up, and maybe you've already been there for a while, or maybe you're called in because it's blown up, what would you say would be the first conversation you have with the CEO?
That's a very good question. And as I mentioned before, it's all about building that trust. It needs to trust me. A lot of times you come from the outside, the CEO doesn't know you. Maybe he knows the company you work for, but he doesn't know you personally. And you come in and you see him usually at his most vulnerable state. He's broken. They try to keep this business alive. And it's all about keeping him calm and trusting you that you are here for them. It's saying, we're going to lead you through this. We are not reacting. We're going to find out what happened, or at least try to. But it has to be together. No blame, just clarity. Because, if he panics, then everything falls.
Interesting. You said try to. Would you say from a sort of a forensic analyst point of view, what percentage of the time are you just able to not solve the mystery of how they breached, how they got in, when they got in? Is that most of the time, or is that a tiny percentage of the time that most CISOs just can't figure it out? You can't find that hole that they crawled in through.
I would say it's much more than you would think. I mean, if everything was, being documented and being configured to have the right visibility and the sufficient visibility, then every incident would have been solved very quickly. But usually it's not the case. Nothing is perfect. And sometimes you just crawl your way in and you investigate for days and weeks. And, eventually the company says, look, it's not that important to us at this point. We restored the services. We kept the business going. The impact was minimum. We contained the incident. We don't really care to know exactly how we got in. But, sometimes companies tell us, look, take as much time as you need to find that root cause. And unfortunately, sometimes you just can't because you don't have sufficient information. And that's why I say, make sure everything is visible. Make sure you log everything. Everything you can log. Because if some things blow up and you need to find why it happened, if you don't have the sufficient logs, you're just blind. And you wouldn't be able to find it ever.
If CNA had been your client pre-incident, what would you have pushed them to fix or prepare for?
I think one of the first items that the front lines are identity and access. I mean, you don't need ransomware if you have a domain admin. You need to have MFA everywhere because MFA is your one wild card. An attacker can get your password, they can get a username, but it's much, much harder getting your MFA. And basically you have to have that anomaly detection. You have to have the capable people to, even if they did get a hold of MFA, you have to have the person that is able to tell you that something's weird. And afterward, as we saw in the CNA incident, they probably weren't segmented right enough because they got exposed and everything got encrypted eventually. And you have to be able to segment so the attacker wouldn't be able to move laterally.
Is there a multi-factor authentication tool that you live by that you would say, you're not going to pry that from my cold dead hands? I trust this tool. It's awesome. It's the best. It's never failed me. Or are they pretty much all the same?
Pretty much I'd say all the same. There's not a specific favorite. The big ones like Microsoft and Google and Okta, they usually do the job. But you usually need to be able to say, even if you don't use those authenticators and you're able to only send emails or SMS messages, everything is something. You need to start somewhere and you need to be able to add that layer. As I said, it's all about the layers. It's all about making the attacker work hard for their money.
I guess it's similar to that sort of old story where you don't have to be fast enough to outrun the bear. You just have to be faster than the guy next to you so that the bear eats him. So if you're making it so hard that the attacker's like, you know what, it's not worth it. We'll just go somewhere where it's easier to breach.
Yeah, that's something that we tell clients a lot, that you don't need to be 100% protected. You just have to make it hard enough for the attacker saying, it's not worth my time. And that's something that we do see sometimes when clients look. We saw that something trying to attack us, but it didn't really go further because we had the right protection mechanisms. So if you do it at a way where you make it hard enough for the attacker, then it should be good enough. Nothing is 100%.
Act 5, the insured. Cyber insurance used to be the safety net, the final layer, the thing you hoped you'd never need but were glad to have. It was built on logic, models, probability curves, loss projections, premiums priced like seatbelts in a luxury car. But CNA's breach cracked that illusion, because when the company writing the policies becomes the victim of the policy, you're forced to ask, where does the risk really live? For years, ransomware attacks followed a script: attack, lock, demand, and then vanish. But this one changed the conversation, not because of how it started, but because of what it cost. CNA didn't just pay a ransom, they reset expectations. $40 million. Confirmed or not, the number took on a weight of its own. It was repeated in boardrooms, in underwriting meetings, in whispered conversations between CISOs and CFOs. And it signaled something dangerous to both sides of the equation. To attackers, it said, insurance companies are lucrative, they're central, and when breached, they have motive to pay fast. To insurers, it said we may have underestimated our own exposure. It wasn't just a CNA problem, it was a blueprint for how quickly the tables could turn. In the months that followed, insurers across the globe revised their stances. Some added ransomware sublimits, others introduced clauses excluding ransom coverage altogether. Premiums climbed, but not because risk had changed, but because now they'd seen it up close. Cyber insurance was never meant to eliminate loss, it was meant to transfer it, to redistribute it. But CNA's breach revealed something difficult to admit. You can't insure against a system you're part of. If the companies pricing the risk are also feeding the targets, then the model isn't just flawed, it's compromised. And somewhere, quietly, defenders began asking harder questions. Are we enabling ransomware by covering it? Are payouts fueling the criminal economy? Should we outlaw ransom payments altogether? There were no simple answers. OFAC had already made its position clear. Paying sanctioned entities was illegal. But Phoenix, in CNA's case, was not sanctioned. So the payment was legal. Ethically fraught, yes, but compliant. So what does it mean when a payment can be legal, effective, and still feel like defeat? This is the paradox of modern cyber defense. You can build well, you can detect early, you can comply with every regulation, and still find yourself with no good options. CNA did what many would have done, what many will do. They contained the damage, protected their clients, restored operations, and followed the law. But the moment they pressed send on that Bitcoin transaction, they stopped being just a victim, and they became a signal. To attackers, it was a green light. To peers, it was a warning. And to regulators, a case study. And maybe that's the cost no one calculates in the insurance tables. Not just the ransom, not just the downtime, but the moment a breach becomes a precedent. CNA moved on, filed their disclosures, closed the case. But for the rest of the industry, the breach never fully ended. It left behind a question still echoing in the background. If the one who insures against the worst-case scenario can't stop it, who can?
How do incidents like CNA's change the way CISOs today build trusts with their boards or with their clients?
It's a good question. The trust with the boards is they don't care about the excuses. They don't care about the blame. They want to see receipts. They want to see your readiness. They want to see how you learned from that mistakes. They want to see what you're going to do next and how you're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. So when building that trust again with the boards, you have to be able to show them that you are doing everything in your power to make sure this doesn't happen. Whether it's playbooks, whether it's policies, whether it's buying more security vendors and paying even more about for cyber insurance. You have to show them what you're doing in order to be prepared.
What should every CISO be doing right now to avoid being the next CNA?
Two things. Like I said, with the board, you have to be able to run the playbook. It's not about tabletop. Tabletop is nice to do once in a while, but you have to run the full simulation. You have to test everything, run the drills, test backups, kill your own services and see who panics. Make sure that someone besides the CISO knows how to initiate the IR. And also, you need to be able to have someone to try to hack you from the outside, whether it's red teaming exercises or penetration tests. You need to do that as well, because you know where your weaknesses are, but potential attackers can know about weaknesses that you don't know about. And if you bring someone from the outside, which is unbiased in a white hat, gray hat type of service, then it can potentially get you a much clearer picture. And we actually do that in OP Innovate as well. We come to clients, we expose those, unbiased vulnerabilities from the outside and tell them, we found a lot of stuff that you didn't know about. And that way they come in and it usually changes the whole picture in that organization.
Interesting. Okay. You see a lot of different types of teams across different verticals and different sectors. What's one mistake you still see too often coming up again and again?
One mistake, as I previously said, is the visibility. People just don't turn on that configuration when you are asked to log the information from whether it's the EDR or it's the firewall, it's the VPN, even if it's local logs like on the server itself or the endpoint, because afterwards when you come in and you investigate the incident, you just don't see anything. Another thing is our shared credentials. A lot of the people still share their credentials. They send it in Slack, they send it in the Teams, they put it in a Google Docs on the cloud. And even more, they don't have the MFA. So sometimes the attacker gets it so easy that he just grabs that password and just does what he wants. And you're not even able to see that anomaly because it's legitimate activity. People a lot of the time obsess over the 0 days because it's cool, it's sexy, but it's what I see from the past few years, it's always the door someone forgot to lock. It's that simple, mechanism that it's so obvious that people sometimes forget to turn it on.
Matan, thank you for those words of wisdom. It was great having you on the show. Looking forward to having you back again. And now, on to our closing. Every breach leaves a mark, not always in the systems, sometimes in the story, and sometimes in the mirror. CNA wasn't the first company to get hit. They weren't the first to pay. But they were one of the first to show what it looks like when the people who price the risk become the risk. For years, insurers spoke with certainty. They modeled loss events, calculated premiums, and forecasted frequency. But cybersecurity isn't weather. It doesn't move in seasons. It shifts, it adapts, and it learns. And this breach made that clear. The attackers didn't need to break the rules, they just needed to study the ones that everyone else was already playing by. CNA paid the ransom, they followed the law, and they recovered. But the breach was never just about one company. It was a signpost for the industry, a moment where the guardians of risk discovered just how vulnerable they really were. And now everyone's policy feels a little more fragile. This is the world we live in now, where safety is a negotiation, where trust is provisional, and where the people who promise protection sometimes need it most. Today, security experts must always be prepared, always vigilant, and always listening for the CISO Signal. All episodes are based on publicly available reports, postmortems, and expert analysis. While we've done our best to ensure accuracy, some cybersecurity incidents evolve over time and not all details have been confirmed. Our goal is to inform and entertain, not to assign blame. Where facts are unclear, we've used cautionary language, and we always welcome your corrections. Thanks for listening to the CISO Signal.